there is a lesson every INFJ eventually learns. Not early, not easily, and rarely without pain. It is not a lesson taught in classrooms. It is not written in books. It is not passed down clearly by others. It is learned through lived experience. It is a lesson about boundaries, about self-worth, about energy, about letting go of roles that were never meant to be permanent. Most INFJs do not learn this lesson in childhood, because early on, their sensitivity is praised only when it is useful to others. They do not learn it in school, where emotional intelligence is rarely protected, only exploited. They do not learn it through success, because success often rewards their overgiving, not their self-respect. INFJs learn this lesson after burnout, after heartbreak, after being the one who stayed too long, after giving too much for too long without being met in return. And once they finally learn it, something irreversible happens. Their life does not become louder. It becomes clearer. Their world does not shrink. It becomes more intentional. And today, we are talking about why INFJs learn this lesson late, what it costs them to learn it slowly, and why mastering it changes everything. If you are an INFJ, this may explain more than you realize. INFJs are often described as insightful, emotionally intelligent, intuitively perceptive, psychologically aware. They understand people deeply. They sense motivations beneath behavior. They see emotional dynamics others overlook. And yet, there is one pattern almost all INFJs share, especially early in life. They give more than they receive. They understand others more than they are understood. They protect harmony even when it costs them their own voice. At first, this feels noble. It feels like kindness. It feels like maturity. It feels like being the bigger person. INFJs are often praised for being patient, understanding, and accommodating. They are told they are wise for their age, emotionally strong and reliable. And for a long time, this reinforces the pattern. Until one day, it doesn't feel noble anymore. It feels heavy. It feels draining. It feels lonely. The truth is not that INFJs are bad at boundaries. The truth is that INFJs are wired to learn one crucial lesson later than most personality types. Not because they are slow, but because they are deep. The lesson INFJs learn late: you are not responsible for everyone's emotional experience. This is the realization that quietly restructures an INFJ's entire life. INFJs grow up sensing emotions before they are spoken. They notice tension in rooms. They feel discomfort in others before words are exchanged. They intuitively adjust themselves to soothe emotional imbalance. This ability makes them compassionate. It also makes them vulnerable. From a young age, many INFJs internalize an unspoken belief. If someone is upset, it must be addressed. If there is conflict, it must be softened. If someone is struggling, it must be carried. They do not consciously choose this role. They fall into it naturally. At first, it feels like kindness, like being supportive, like doing the right thing. Over time, it becomes self-erasure. INFJs often do not realize they are overgiving because their empathy does not feel like effort. It feels instinctive, automatic, necessary, and instincts are rarely questioned until they begin to hurt. Why INFJs learn this later than others? INFJs lead with introverted intuition supported by extrovert feeling. This creates a mind that is deeply attuned to emotional patterns, future outcomes, and relational harmony. They sense needs before they are expressed. They anticipate emotional consequences. They feel responsible for maintaining balance. Other personality types often learn boundaries through conflict. They push back. They assert. They externalize discomfort. INFJs avoid conflict. They absorb it. They internalize tension. They rationalize imbalance. They explain away red flags. They do not notice the cost immediately. The cost accumulates quietly. By the time INFJs realize something is wrong, they are often emotionally exhausted, subtly resentful, or disconnected from their own inner world. This delay is not weakness. It is the cost of deep empathy in a world that rarely teaches emotional self-protection. INFJs confuse understanding with obligation. One of the most subtle and painful traps INFJs fall into is the belief that understanding someone means staying with them. INFJs are natural psychological observers. They do not just see behavior. They see what shaped it. They notice the wound beneath the reaction. They recognize the trauma behind the defensiveness. They understand the fear driving control, anger, or withdrawal. This depth of perception is one of the INFJ's greatest gifts. But it can also become their quiet undoing. Because once they understand someone's pain, something inside them shifts. They feel responsible. They tell themselves that if they can see why someone behaves the way they do, then leaving would be unfair. That setting boundaries would be unkind. That walking away would mean abandoning someone who is already hurting. So they stay. They excuse behavior that hurts them. They override their own limits. They minimize their own pain. They tolerate what slowly erodes their sense of self. They confuse understanding with obligation. But understanding explains behavior. It does not justify harm. It does not require endurance. It does not demand self-sacrifice. This distinction is learned late because INFJs naturally see the full psychological picture. They see the wounded child beneath the adult, the insecurity beneath the control, the fear beneath the anger, the loneliness beneath the manipulation. And because they see it, they hope. They believe patience will heal. They believe consistency will change things. They believe love will eventually be enough. Until something inside them fractures. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Why INFJs overstay relationships, jobs, and roles. INFJs do not leave when something becomes uncomfortable. Discomfort feels familiar to them. They have lived with emotional discomfort their entire lives. INFJs leave when something becomes unaligned. And that threshold is dangerously high. In relationships, INFJs stay because they see potential. They don't just see who someone is. They see who they could become. They imagine growth. They imagine healing. They imagine a future that has not yet arrived. In careers, INFJs stay because they believe in meaning. They endure toxic systems because the mission feels important. They sacrifice themselves for causes that resonate with their values. In families and social roles, INFJs stay because they feel responsible for emotional stability. They become the listener, the mediator, the emotional anchor. INFJs do not leave when they are tired. They leave when they are empty, when there is nothing left to give, when their inner world feels hollow, when their intuition finally says, "This is no longer sustainable." By the time an INFJ walks away, they have already tried everything. They have already adjusted themselves countless times. They have already given more than was ever asked of them. This is why the INFJ door slam is so often misunderstood. It is not impulsive. It is not cruel. It is not sudden. It is the final boundary after years of invisible compromises. It happens only after the INFJ has learned the lesson they resisted learning. That their presence is not an obligation. That their empathy is not a contract. That their depth is not an endless resource. The cost of learning this late. Learning this lesson late comes with a heavy price. It costs INFJs emotional energy. It costs them time. It costs them parts of their identity. Burnout becomes familiar. Emotional exhaustion feels constant. Guilt lingers even when they do nothing wrong. Many INFJs reach adulthood incredibly skilled at supporting others and deeply disconnected from their own needs. They can articulate what everyone else feels. They struggle to name their own emotions. They can show up fully for others. They do not know how to show up for themselves. This is not because INFJs lack self-awareness. It is because they were conditioned, subtly and repeatedly, to prioritize harmony over authenticity, to be understanding instead of honest, to be accommodating instead of boundaried, to be strong instead of supported. Over time, this conditioning creates an internal imbalance. And eventually, the system collapses. The turning point, when INFJs finally choose themselves. There is always a moment when something shifts. It might come through a breakdown, a betrayal that cannot be explained away, a health scare, a moment of deep, unmistakable loneliness. Something forces the INFJ to pause. And for the first time, the questions turn inward. Why am I always the one holding everything together? Why does my understanding never seem to come back to me? Why do I feel invisible even when I give so much? This is not a moment of anger. It is a moment of clarity. The lesson does not integrate intellectually. INFJs often understood it conceptually long ago. It integrates emotionally. They feel, in their body and nervous system, that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. And once this realization lands, it cannot be unlearned. What changes after INFJs learn this lesson? When INFJs finally understand that they are not responsible for everyone's emotional experience, their life changes quietly but permanently. They stop over-explaining themselves. They stop chasing closure from people incapable of providing it. They stop staying where they are merely tolerated instead of genuinely valued. They choose environments more intentionally. They protect solitude without guilt. They conserve emotional energy with care. They still care, but they care wisely. This is when INFJs appear calmer, more selective, more grounded, not because they have become colder, but because they have become clearer. Clarity is not the loss of compassion. It is compassion guided by self-respect. Why this lesson makes INFJs powerful? Once INFJs stop overfunctioning emotionally, their natural gifts refine. Their intuition sharpens because it is no longer clouded by guilt. Their creativity deepens because their inner world is protected. Their boundaries stabilize because they trust their perceptions. They stop leaking energy into unreciprocal spaces. They start directing it toward what truly matters. This is when INFJs become exceptional mentors, writers, counselors, strategists, and leaders. Not because they give more, but because they give with intention. Wisdom replaces sacrifice. Alignment replaces approval seeking. Presence replaces people pleasing. Their depth becomes sustainable. Why INFJs couldn't learn this earlier? This lesson cannot be rushed. It requires experience. Not theory. Not advice. Not warnings. INFJs had to feel the cost personally. They had to reach the point where empathy alone was no longer enough. Where understanding became painful instead of noble. Where self-abandonment was no longer tolerable. This is not failure. This is initiation. INFJs are not meant to live shallow lives. They are meant to integrate deep truths through lived experience. And integration takes time. If you are an INFJ and you feel like you learned this lesson too late, hear this gently. You learned it exactly when you were ready. Before that, your heart needed to stay open. Your empathy needed to mature. Your intuition needed refinement. Now, you are learning discernment. You are learning that not everything deserves your depth. Not everyone earns your presence. Not every problem is yours to solve. This is not loss. This is evolution. You are not becoming less compassionate. You are becoming more whole. And wholeness is what allows INFJs to thrive. So take a quiet moment. Breathe. Reflect. You were never meant to give yourself away. You were meant to understand when to give and when to keep.